Did you know that millions of Americans are struggling with chronic health issues, but only about 0.2% of the US population has ever seen a registered dietitian, which can make all the difference? We know that nutrition is so important in prevention of chronic disease. Today, I have with me Tamar Samuels. Tamar's unique approach to nutrition care integrates lifestyle medicine, which I love, behavioral modification, so important, that is pulled from her clinical nutrition, psychology, and coaching science training. As a registered dietitian, she has helped so many people transform their relationship with food and overcome various health conditions to improve their lives. She is the co-founder of Culina Health and a woman of color who is passionate about making personalized and sustainable nutrition care accessible to everyone. She earned her master's in clinical nutrition from New York University. She completed her clinical training at the Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. She has been recognized as one of the top holistic dietitians in New York City by Well Plus Good, and she's been featured on the Huffington Post, Prevention, Pop Sugar, Women's Health, Shape, Insider, and the Tamron Hall Show. I believe I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah.
Tamar, welcome to the show.
Hi, Carol. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm excited to dive into this with someone of your experience. And when I went on Culina Health's website, I was really impressed with the level of education on there. And then also with the fact that you accept the different types of healthcare insurance, because oftentimes I have people on here that they have the ability and the knowledge to help people, but their services are so, they're expensive.
Yeah.
Not everyone can afford them. So I'm excited that you make this broader reach. And I wanted to start with, I was looking into how African Americans have a higher rate of chronic disease like heart disease and stroke, type 2 diabetes. And of course, we know diet is huge. But what role does health education and their ability to access healthcare play into this? Can you speak into this a little bit and the disparity that we see in health?
Yeah, Carol, thank you for highlighting this really important issue from a public health lens, right? So we see pretty clear disparities within Black community when it relates to a number of different chronic conditions, including cancer, particularly for Black women and breast cancer, but also for chronic disease like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. And this is a complex and multifactorial issue. Certainly, access to healthy foods is a huge challenge here when we think about social determinants of health. Food access is really critical to being able to have healthy and sustainable diet, right? If we don't live in a community that has availability of affordable, healthy foods. And quite frankly, in America right now, most food is not healthy or most
Right.
food is not. So while we have access to fruits and vegetables in ways that we haven't in the past, there are quite a lot of costs associated with eating healthy, but just eating in general. So when we think about food disparities, access to healthy food is one of them. But there's also something that's not discussed as much, which is Black people, people of color, tend to receive something that we call systematic racism within the healthcare system in the form of something interpersonal, in addition to sort of societal racism at large, the way that our systems are structured. But when it comes to interpersonal racism, this is really key because a lot of well-intended healthcare providers may not know that they have biases. And we all have biases. They may not be ethnical or race related, but we all have biases. And it's really important for us as healthcare providers to ensure that we are checking our biases at the door when we are treating patients and provide culturally affirming care, because we know that it actually leads to better health outcomes. So really important for us as healthcare providers to ensure that we are aware of our own biases, that we are receiving training on providing culturally affirming recommendations and interventions. Particularly in the nutrition space, this is really important here because our interventions are food-based and our food is culturally informed, right? Our decisions around food are based on our cultural and familial experiences. And so really important for us as registered dietitians to make sure that the recommendations and suggestions that we're making around food are aligned with what our patients traditionally like to eat, want to eat, include foods that are important for their culture.
You hit on something so important because I live in the state of New Mexico, and so we have a very large Native American and Hispanic community here. It's a very large community. So in this Hispanic community, for instance, it's the enchiladas and all of the cheesy, fun foods, burritos, quesadillas, all of these things that might be high fat or they're fried with the Native American community, the fry bread, things such as that. And it can be so difficult because then when you go to work with a client, they're almost seeing it as punitive to
Yes.
eat healthy. And so finding a way, like how can they prepare these foods, still get that flavor, with the health benefits, without sacrificing the flavor of the food.
That's right. We don't need to eliminate really any foods. I think it depends on your health condition. If you have celiac disease or food allergy, obviously it's really important for you to practice complete elimination of certain foods. And some people do need to eliminate foods on a short-term or long-term basis in order for them to manage a health condition. But ultimately, when it comes to, our favorite foods, even if they're ultra processed or they're more energy dense, they contain more calories and less nutrients, we can still include them as part of a healthy eating plan. And I think that nutrition has really been, the way that it's discussed is so much in extremes. You can't have this, you got to cut that out. It's very polarizing, as you said, which can feel really punitive and scary. And I think is probably one of the biggest barriers to even seeing a dietitian, let alone, implementing some of our recommendations. People think, working with a dietitian, we're the food police, we're going to take away all of the things you love. And they're scared for good reason, right? But the reality is that we at Culina Health, the way that we practice our care really is aligned with patient-first methodology. So how can we put our patients first? We know that behavior change is foundational to anything, any outcome, any adherence to anything we recommend. So in order for us to get better health outcomes for our patients, we need to work with them and collaborate with them on a plan that's actually sustainable, that they enjoy. And that can include cultural foods that are fried. It can include refined grains. It can include sugar. As you said, how can we modify these foods to make them a little more health promoting, or how can we leave them, in the diet in smaller moderation, add in more health promoting foods to balance it out? We talk about frequency and quantity and serving size as a way for us to mitigate some of the negative health effects associated with ultra-processed foods.
So good. I went down the rabbit hole a few years ago, as I think many people do. I have autoimmune disease. And so I started looking into the different diets, and some are saying, oh, you can't ever have gluten, you can't ever have dairy, grain-free. And speaking with my clients, I began to realize it was stressing me out, and then it was stressing them out because what's left to eat? Like I remember reading an article, and I can't even remember where it was from, and it was talking about, yes, you can have carbs, but then when you went in and looked at the carbs, it was only vegetables. And yeah, we want the vegetables, but I'm thinking to myself, that's not enough of a carb. Like I need more of a carb, like,
Can I get
whole
a
grain.
potato, please?
Yeah, please. And it's like everything's been labeled bad, like, okay, that'll spike your blood sugar. This will cause inflammation. And I think it really is over the top right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. This fear of foods is becoming a huge problem. And I think it just speaks to the larger issue that we have in the industry, right? People are getting nutrition advice from TikTok. The nutrition advice is not grounded in science, or if it is, the information is sensationalized and it's not personalized, right? There's a large study that came out about ultra processed foods that said it may have an impact on mental health. In ultra processed foods, and, you have an increased incidence of chronic disease. And while, that is true, when we really dig into the research, we see that there are nuances here. We need to really look at it from the lens of the individual, right? Well, does that mean we have to completely avoid ultra processed foods? No, it doesn't mean that. And the research actually doesn't say that. The research doesn't say that you have to completely completely eliminate ultra processed foods from your diet? Do we want to consume mostly whole plant-based foods as a foundation of our diet? Absolutely. Does that mean we need to completely eliminate animal foods? Absolutely not. Right? So, again, I think the extremes are what really creates these barriers for people to even just get started in their journey towards healthy eating.
Yeah, it's so polarizing because you see people on, say, Instagram or TikTok or whatever, and they're arguing back and forth these food rules. One saying it's over here, the other saying it's over here. In reality, I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle of being reasonable. You're traveling. Like I know when I travel, I've been caught in situations where, no, I didn't pack a shake or a meal or whatever. And here come the pretzels on the plane. And it's like, okay, I'm starved. We're eating the pretzels on the
Yes.
plane. I don't think one bag of pretzels is going to, hurt me for life. So I really like this approach a lot. And then I think really going back to the research, because people are saying things that are not based in research, or the studies are so small and insignificant that you really can't apply the data.
Yeah, especially in the autoimmune space, right? I think when we're managing these chronic conditions, we feel out of control of our bodies, and that's very reasonable, right? Like metabolically, from an inflammatory perspective, like our body is kind of on this autopilot where it's doing its damage to our body. And we want to be able to stop and exert some sort of control over that. We need to speak with a doctor in order for us to get medications, which sometimes work and sometimes don't work. But we all have access to food, and food is something that we have some agency over in our lives. And so, of course, we're going to look to diet as a way for us to heal and support our health and, really work on managing or sometimes even treating our condition. And sometimes food can be powerful enough to do that for people. Sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes we do need medical interventions. Sometimes we need surgical interventions. There's a lot of variables here. And so it's really important for us to focus on food, but not focus exclusively on food as a way for us to completely heal ourselves, right? So really coming at it from a holistic perspective. And dietitian can really help you manage that, right? Like we can really drive your care plan as it relates to nutrition. And then really, if we get results to a certain point, we can say, I think it might be time for us to consider these options or these options. Really work with your healthcare team to get you, multidisciplinary intervention and a plan that's more effective.
When we're looking at cancer in particular, because it's so complex,
Yeah.
there's different types of cancers caused by different types of situations and genetics and lifestyle. It's so broad. How important do you think our diet is? And I don't like to use the word prevent, but maybe increasing our chances of not developing cancer in the future.
Yeah, there's certainly some really robust research on nutrition and diet on preventing cancer. We know that what's really important here is to focus on anti-inflammatory foods. And so really ensuring that we're having lots of whole plant-based foods, lots of different colors. So when we think about color in nutrition, all of those colors represent different antioxidants. And antioxidants are really what we're hoping to add as much into our diet as possible, ideally from foods, not from supplements. And that in particular is one of the most powerful tools for cancer prevention. Can you eat a whole plant food diet and cure cancer? No, you can't. But there's a lot that we can do as it relates to anti-inflammatory eating. So managing our weight. Some cancers are driven by hormonal imbalances that we see related to obesity or excess fat. So if that is something that you're working on, you may have some great anti-cancer benefits associated with weight loss if that's something you need as part of your health plan.
And now, if somebody has cancer, and I know it probably depends again on the type of cancer, such as breast cancer or colon cancer, and they're receiving treatment. So maybe they're going through radiation, chemotherapy. And I just recently got this question from a client, and they're having trouble eating enough. So they're having
Mm-hmm.
trouble getting enough protein, which is, important for that repair phase.
Yeah.
What can they do? Is it smaller meals, or just getting protein any way you can? What can this patient do?
Yeah, Carol, great question. So when it comes to cancer treatment, as you said, we want to ensure that we're getting adequate calories overall, but also adequate protein. And so there are a ton of things that we can do with smoothies, blended drinks. We can pack in literally 1,000 calories in a shake. So when we healthy to really any food, but particularly smoothies, because it's a lot more palatable and easier to drink. We can add double the amount of calories in a very small volume. So when it comes to weight gain, we want to think about foods that have small volume that have a lot of calories, and fat has 9 calories per gram compared to carbohydrates. So we get over double the amount of calories for the same volume. So you can add some healthy fats like olive oil, avocado. You could add lots of nuts and nut butters that can take a smoothie, from 500 calories to 1,000 calories. And then when it comes to protein, you certainly want to add protein foods like yogurt, but can also add some protein supplements as part of that. It might just be a little bit easier and more palatable. Protein powders are, for the most part, regulated, so really important to ensure that you're choosing a product that doesn't have any additives. Ideally, we're focused on a product that is minimally processed, doesn't have a lot of ingredients, and just contains a very small handful of ingredients. Depending on your tolerability, you could do whey protein. You could also do egg white based protein or plant based protein, but just want to pea protein, but just want to ensure that you're choosing a product that you feel good about. That doesn't have any.
Do you have, I don't know if you can make suggestions, but I get that question all the time. And then a lot of the women I work with are over 50, and often what happens is they'll get very sensitive to whey. So
Mm,
whey is, of course, a great form of the protein shake, but
yeah.
not all of us can handle that digestion wise.
Yeah, yeah. There's a ton of products out there, which is great. I do like the white protein products. Um, those tend to be great. They have a full amino acid profile. The pea protein is also a good plant-based version. I also like collagen. Collagen is a great product, particularly if you're working on bone and joint health. So those are some good alternatives.
Yeah, and the bone broth, I'm sure, is in there too, which can be so
Yeah.
soothing for the digestion. I want to shift over to digestion because that's another thing I see so much of this, where the gut microbiome it's changed, and I experienced this. So all of a sudden, everything I could eat in my 20s or 30s was starting to bother me in my 50s, and now being in my 60s, I noticed that
Yeah.
I'm just a lot more sensitive to having digestive upset. Things don't digest as easily. And I don't know if you run into this quite a bit where you're dealing with people who are trying to heal their gut basically. And what is your approach to kind of getting to the bottom of some of these gut issues?
Yeah, so gut issues are so complex and highly personalized. You can be diagnosed with the same condition and have two very different treatments. So when it comes to how to approach this, it has to be a lot of trial and learn. Of course, we have evidence-based strategies that we can implement, but as a patient, you have to be willing to experiment with certain things to see if they work. So a few easy wins that you can try are one, ensuring that you're chewing your food adequately. So as we get older, we lose a little bit of our digestive enzymes. Um, and the more that we chew, the more of the digestive enzyme amylase that we produce. Amylase helps us to break down carbohydrates. And so we're really stimulating the juices within our digestive system, within our GI tract, when we really chew our food properly. So really important for you to focus on just chewing your food more, taking it slow, not taking big gulps without chewing. You don't have to, chew your food to a mush, but being really intentional about chewing your food can be really helpful to stimulate your internal digestive enzyme production. So that can be a really helpful tip. It can also be helpful for you to just decrease your portion size a bit. Perhaps, just your digestive system has slowed and it's just a little bit too much on your body to manage so much at the same time. So working on slightly decreasing your portion size, maybe having smaller and more frequent meals if you want to ensure that you're getting protein intake, calorie intake. That can be really helpful so you don't have such a large digestive burden within one setting. So those are very quick, easy things that you can experiment with that might have a really big impact. Other things are making sure that you're not eating while stressed. So creating a space where you are calm and relaxed during mealtime. We have this thing called fight or flight within our nervous system. And when we're stressed, we're kind of activating our fight or flight, which shuttles resources away from our digestive system. And so the opposite of fight or flight is rest and digest. And so when you're in a state of hypervigilance or stress, and you're eating, you're really not optimizing for digestion, you're optimizing for survival. And so really focusing on creating a relaxing space when you're eating so your digestive system can kick in more naturally and be more effective can be really, really helpful. Again, these are all free, easy tools that you can use to help to support digestion. Some people need a little bit more acidity in their diet to help break things down. So you can add vinegars and lemon to food to help break things down. Eat more probiotic-rich foods like kimchi and yogurt and tempeh and fermented foods like cheese. These all have probiotics which can help you break down your food without you having to do any of the work. So it's sort of pre-digested. So there's a lot that you can try and experiment with. And then, of course, there's a number of different supplements. If those strategies don't work well enough, you can always work with a dietitian to help you kind of come up with a supplement routine that works best for you.
Chewing, it's funny you were talking about that. Such a simple thing. And I know I personally forget it because my mind is always on to the next thing, or I'm stressed about a deadline or whatever. And I'll catch myself eating too fast for one, and not really fully chewing my food. And it's such a simple thing. And we think, oh, we're adults, we should know this. But it's funny how we can get in a habit of running around or eating in the car. I did that a lot when I had young kids. We were always eating in the car and always on the go, going from one thing to the next. So I think it's really good advice to just kind of slow down and really enjoy your meal and take your time and go into that more of a rest state as opposed to the fight or flight. And I think that would help with so many of these issues. Now, what about food sensitivity tests? Because that got to be a really hot one. I was using them for a while and then I stopped because once again, it was stressing out my clients. And then they were all coming back with the same sensitivities. And I'm like, well, how can that be? I've just had 10 different tests come back and they're all identical.
Yeah.
How valuable are these things, or do we need them?
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned this, Carol, because the validity of the food sensitivity tests is not great. It's not something that we have to do in order for us to identify food sensitivities. Really, the gold standard for this is an elimination and reintroduction protocol. So food sensitivities is the thing. There's something called non-celiac gluten sensitivity, in which people, have ruled out celiac disease, have ruled out wheat allergies, and they still are experiencing symptoms when they consume gluten. But unfortunately, we don't have robust testing to really be able to say that you do have a gluten sensitivity. And so the best way to really manage that is working with a dietitian to do an elimination diet and then a reintroduction diet to see what your symptoms are. I don't recommend doing this alone. Oftentimes people will eliminate gluten and they'll be like, oh, I feel so much better. But they actually feel better because, they're not consuming ultra processed foods. While, gluten is found in many healthy foods, it's also found in a lot of foods that generally don't make us feel good, like cakes and goods and processed breads and things like that. And so people will say, I actually do really fine with sourdough bread. I have no issues with it. But when I consume, conventional bread from the grocery store, so there's a lot of nuances with food sensitivities. So definitely want to make sure if you do suspect you have a sensitivity, rule out allergies with an allergist or your primary care doctor. And once you have ruled out those allergies, you can work with a dietitian identifying sensitivities via an elimination protocol and a reintroduction protocol.
I had gotten rid of gluten. Well, I used to compete in bodybuilding, and so when you're getting ready for the stage, you pretty much eliminate all the breads, all the pastas, all those kinds of things. I no longer compete, but what I found was my fiber content was so low when I got
Yeah.
rid of some of the healthy grains that might have some gluten in them. So I've kind of reintroduced in small quantities that back
Great.
into my diet, and I'm experimenting with it because it's so much easier for me to meet my fiber count. If I'm
Mm-hmm.
just relying on fruits and vegetables, it's a little hard for me to get enough fiber. And of course, fiber is, I'm sure we'll agree on this one, is so important. I mean, for cardiovascular, cancer prevention, things such as that.
Yeah, and exercise, right? While fiber doesn't contribute to calories overall, carbohydrates, starchy carbohydrates, which fiber is found in, is really important for fueling our workouts, and it's important for mental health. And as you said, digestion. When people go too low carb, they tend to get constipated because they're not consuming adequate fiber. We also produce quite a lot of serotonin in our gut. Carbohydrates help us produce serotonin in our brain. So it can make us feel good when we have carbs from a mood perspective. It helps with our sleep. Um, so want to ensure that we're not cutting out starchy carbs. Even when you're managing blood sugar abnormalities, you could still include starchy carbohydrates as part of your diet. We certainly want to think about modifying starchy carbohydrates for people who are trying to lose weight or have prediabetes or managing insulin resistance. We can modify carbohydrate intake to help with metabolic health. We don't have to eliminate carbohydrates, particularly starchy carbohydrates.
That's such good news.
Yes, carbs are so good.
Yeah, I function better. I feel better. I'm less
More
grumpy. I
energy.
have more energy because I work out a lot. I'm active. I'm not sitting around. And then, interestingly enough, if I cut my carbs down too low, my body looks worse. Like my muscles look better and fuller and more defined if I have that right ratio of carbohydrates in there. It's really interesting.
Yeah, people find that when they go too low on carbs, they just don't have good energy, so their workouts suffer from that. Your body actually can go into that fight or flight state where you're not quite in a ketogenic state, where you're getting energy from ketones, but your carbohydrate intake is too low to actually like support your brain needs and your muscle needs. So you're kind of like in this constant state of low energy and difficult for you to lose weight. I don't generally recommend the ketogenic diet because it has quite a lot of risks associated with it, and it's not more effective than healthy, balanced, lower calorie diet for weight loss. There's some space for keto with certain populations of individuals. For the vast majority of people, it's not a diet. It is beneficial for long-term outcomes. But yeah, having those carbohydrates in the diet can be really helpful outside of, just feeling better from a mental health perspective, from a digestion perspective. There's a long way that those carbs go. So you don't need to cut out gluten. You don't need to cut out carbs. And you can include these foods in your diet and still get the result.
Now, with our healthy fats, because I see that overdone a lot too, and we're kind of into that keto realm here, where women are being advised, particularly in midlife and beyond, okay, take that fat count up, take the protein count up, and then these carbs are way down low, only coming from vegetables, which vegetables are great, but
Mm-hmm.
they're not having really those starchier carbs that we think of. How do you feel about this higher fat ratio in diets? Is it better to just have that balanced effect of protein, carbs, fats more on an even keel?
Yeah, the research really does support there is no one macronutrient distribution that is more beneficial than another. If anything, having balanced macronutrients is probably going to be the most sustainable and the most effective. If it's sustainable, then it's effective, right? And so we have to be mindful about adding too much fat because, as I mentioned earlier, it does have over double the amount of calories per volume compared to protein and carbohydrates. We also want to make sure that as women, as we get older, particularly within the perimenopause, postmenopausal, cardiovascular disease is a risk factor that we need to think about. And so when we're consuming fats, we want to be mindful about ensuring that we're having healthy fats that support our health and don't increase cholesterol. So this is your Mediterranean style eating pattern. We're having nuts and seeds and olive oil, olives as sort of our main source avocado. We can still have saturated fats, but we want to just make sure that we are having saturated fats from plant-based foods like coconut. If we can have saturated fat from animal products, but we want to just decrease the amount that we're having. And that is really important just from a cardiovascular health perspective, particularly for those who are at a high risk. But no, we don't need to have a high fat diet. High fat, low carb can also be challenging for our digestive system because, again, we're decreasing our fiber intake, which is so important for digestive health, but also for cardiovascular health. But high fat foods can also be really tough on digestive and tend to cause some diarrhea for folks that have trouble breaking it down. Again, like going back to enzymes, it's really important for us to have adequate enzymes as we get older. We start to lose some of the efficacy of our enzymes. So it's a little bit harder to break down. So again, having a balance is really key when it comes to overall healthy eating patterns, certainly as we get older.
So, how does somebody know how many carbohydrates to consume? Obviously, if somebody's active, they're at the gym every day, they're going to use those carbs. I mean, those muscles are going to grab that up and use that energy. But well, let's say they're inactive and they've got quite a bit of weight to lose. What would be a good ratio? Because I do see this quite a bit too, where a woman, she's got a significant amount of weight to lose, and maybe she's not yet very active because they kind of get caught in this pattern of, okay, the weight's creating some tension on the joints. Maybe they're having joint pain.
Mm-hmm.
And it's difficult to get up and get 10,000 steps a day or whatever it is. What should their carbohydrate percentage be or count be?
Yeah, so I like to leverage some really practical nutrition advice when it comes to carbohydrates. So instead of counting macronutrients and doing all of the calculations, which we do internally as dietitians, so that's the science behind it. But as an individual in your day-to-day life, you don't need to count macros, you don't need to weigh and measure your food. You could use something we called a balanced plate method, in which you are looking at your plate holistically and making half of your plate vegetables or produce. So fruit or vegetables. You want to try to have a quarter of your plate as protein and a quarter of your plate as starchy carbohydrates. If you're looking to lose weight, you can start with just trying that for 3 meals a day. But you may need to go down even lower. If you find that that's still too many carbohydrates for you, you can try modifying that to once a day, twice a day, or once a day. Modifying the portion and the amount that you're having based on the plate method can be a really practical way for you to think about carbohydrate intake. A fistful is about a cup, depending on how big your fist is, and about a cup of rice, for example, is 45 grams of carbohydrates. So you're getting quite a lot of carbs within just a cup alone. So just cutting back to just a cup is still having a big impact, but cutting back even more depending on how much of a driver insulin resistance is as part of your weight loss journey. I usually don't recommend eliminating starches entirely for anyone. Modifying portion size and frequency can be really helpful. You can even get into sort of the weeds of it. Try having it at night to help you with sleep and digestion, or try having it right before workouts to help with your energy before and after workouts. So there's a lot of cool experimentation that you can do within just that balanced plate method.
I like the experimentation. A colleague and friend of mine always says, get curious, get curious. That's what I'm doing right now with my grains. I'm just trying different ones, see how it affects me. And then what about that? You mentioned having it at night, because I know it can be almost good for sleep and calming, but yet we're told oftentimes, oh, don't eat carbs after 4 in the afternoon and things such as that.
I know. So carbs, as I mentioned earlier, help to produce serotonin. Serotonin helps to produce melatonin. Melatonin helps us to sleep. So having carbs at night can be a good way for us to feel relaxed and calm, which can help us get a good night's sleep. And when we get a good night's sleep, we're actually doing a lot of good work for our metabolism. Studies show that sleep deprivation and insomnia has a significant impact on our metabolic rate and on insulin resistance. So you see how it's so complex and everything is related, right? If we're eliminating carbs completely at night, that might decrease calories overall, but it may have an impact on our sleep, which kind of mitigates the effect of that for some folks. So again, going back to what you said, really important for us to experiment. But I definitely recommend when having this starchy carbohydrates to either do it at night or do it before workouts, after workouts, so you could fuel your workout and replenish your glycogen stores in your muscles post workout. So it can be really helpful within the time period of exercising and at night.
Now, combining carbs and fats, that's another thing. That kind of
Mm-hmm.
comes from my competition world experience. They would say, well, don't have your fat and your carb, like it's either protein and carb or protein and fat. How much truth is in that?
So it's really interesting because I think that comes from the fact perhaps with absorption when you're having carbohydrates with they're more likely to potentially absorb them. I'm not sure what the methodology is behind that. That said, there isn't much truth to it. So you don't have to have this or that. Again, like having foods within a balanced plate is really the best approach. It's also the most sustainable and palatable and enjoyable over time. It's possible now that I'm kind of like thinking through where that comes from. It's possible just overall calories, right? Like we know that um, protein, or we know that fat contains double the amount of calories per volume, and carbohydrates are foods that people tend to overeat. So having a combination of both of them will just contribute to just excess calories overall. Practicing moderation for both is probably the most sustainable.
Yeah, I agree because it can be almost a little bit stressful trying to figure out, oh, I better not have that fat before my workout, and I need to have it here and I need to have it there, which again, that kind of comes from that competition world because they're I don't know, I think they were the original biohackers, bodybuilders,
Totally,
trying
yeah.
to milk every little bit out of the workouts and the food. I'm
Well,
gonna
when it comes to exercise nutrition, sometimes having fat before you exercise can be hard on your GI.
yes.
And it's harder to break down fat. So even though fat has over double the amount of calories per volume than carbohydrates, getting access to that energy is much more difficult than carbohydrates. It's so easy for us to break down carbs and get it into our
Oh yeah.
bloodstream where we could use it quickly. And so that's why we typically recommend having more carbohydrates before a workout because we can get that energy very, very quickly. Whereas if we're consuming fat, even though it has calories, it doesn't have glucose, and glucose is our primary fuel source from a muscle perspective. So that's where the recommendation comes in terms of like pre-workout fuel. We do want to fuel our workouts with carbohydrates. Does that mean we have to eliminate fats completely? No, it does not. If we add fats to carbs, then it slows the absorption of the carbs. So it can take a little bit longer for us to get that fuel. But again, as you said, Carol, like there's so many nuances here. Like if you eat 2 hours before a workout, then you want the absorption to be slower. So so it can be really confusing for the everyday person to manage all of these recommendations.
Yeah, I remember the big one when I was competing was you've got to consume your protein shake or your little meal of protein-based meal within 20 minutes of ending the workout. And now I've heard, no, that's not a thing. Do you have ideas around that?
Yeah. So we do have this post-exercise period, but it actually studies show that it's about 60 minutes and not 20 minutes. And I'm sure it's pretty variable depending on the individual, but to be safe, we can make it a 60-minute time frame post-workout where our muscles are primed to really accept amino acids, which is the building blocks of protein. So when we exercise, we're breaking down our muscles. We want to make sure that we are replenishing those muscles with protein in our food, specifically, replenishing them with amino acids. And we're more sort of primed to be able to absorb and accept those amino acids right after a workout. So give yourself, make sure you're eating within 60 minutes or an hour after exercise, and make sure that meal does contain carbohydrates and protein.
An hour is a lot more reasonable than the 20 minutes. I had many a day of sitting down on the bench at the gym and eating my cold tilapia and which
Oh,
is disgusting, and rice
disgusting.
because I felt like I had to get it in right away, and the drive was longer than 20 minutes. I'm like, "Oh, no, I'm gonna sit here and shovel it in." Now, what about intermittent fasting? That was a hot topic for a while. Now it's kind of faded to the background. Is that good for women to do? Is how does that affect our blood sugar levels?
Yeah, I'm so glad you bring this topic up, particularly as it relates to women, because the majority of the research, the larger studies on intermittent fasting, are on men.
Yes.
They are also on individuals who have overweight or obesity, who have some sort of cardiometabolic dysfunction, so insulin resistance, diabetes, prediabetes. So the larger studies are really the outcomes of those studies are really more applicable to the patient population versus, maybe women who just want to lose a couple pounds or who are potentially doing it from a longevity perspective. Because we can't necessarily apply, the so-called benefits of intermittent fasting to all populations because the research is really limited there. The research is also limited in terms of long-term studies. So we do have some good research on intermittent fasting, but most of the studies are short-term, so we don't know what the long-term impact is. So really important for us to think about that when we're interpreting the research on intermittent fasting. Really, any nutrition study is this study looking at a patient population that is diverse from different backgrounds, ethnicity backgrounds, but also gender. And if not, then can we apply those findings to the populations that are missing within the research? Probably not. So that is really important to think about. With intermittent fasting, it's important for us to, again, think about this fight or flight fasted state, right? When we are in a fasted state, you're increasing our insulin resistance as part of that. And that can make weight loss actually quite difficult. So it does depend on the fasting protocol that you're using. Actually, the fasting protocols vary quite a bit within the research. The intermittent fasting that people think about is time restricted eating. That's the one where you have this window of time, usually 8 to 10 hours, where you are not eating. But actually, a lot of the research is on different protocols where you are having a 500 or less calorie diet 2 days a week and then eating ad libitum or eating liberally the rest of the time. So not only do we have to think about the populations of people that are being studied, but also the different intermittent protocols. The time restricted eating or feeding protocol is probably the most liberal, which is good. But again, it might not be the best option, particularly if you're someone who has a history of disordered eating. And having these very strict rules around what time you can eat can exacerbate your disordered eating, make you want to eat more, you feel deprived. A lot of people actually experience hunger during those fasting periods. And again, when you're hungry, it impacts your mood, it impacts your energy, so it's not something that I recommend across the board. It could be good for a small subset of individuals. Really working with a dietitian can help you kind of find the nuances. Some people naturally aren't hungry in the morning, but then they tend to overeat at night.
Yeah.
It's not that they're not hungry in the morning, they're just skipping breakfast and then they get really hungry at night right before overeat and then, wake up and feel full. So it really just depends.
Yeah, I agree. And it can be stressful for some women, especially if they're in that perimenopausal window where nothing is flatlined. It's up, it's down, it's estrogen's up, it's down, and progesterone are doing this dance, and maybe they're skipping cycles. If their energy, I always say if your energy is low and you didn't sleep well, probably not the day to do a 16-hour fast. Get up and have breakfast, but
Yes.
take some stress. I know I kind of use it like a tool. I go in and out. For me, 12 to 14 hours tends to work well. And I do it more for digestive rest because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, okay, just settle down, give yourself a little bit of break where you're, not reaching for, because I do think Americans do snack too much. They're reaching for these foods
Or
throughout the
don't
day.
snack enough.
Really? Oh, tell me about
Yeah,
this.
yeah, I know. I just find that a big challenge for people is that, they'll have breakfast and lunch, but then they won't have dinner until 8 o'clock. Lunch is at noon. We're going full 8 hours.
Yeah.
They get to
Okay.
dinner, they're starving, they overeat, then there's this like cascade of guilt and shame, right? So I think like having balanced meals, even if you are doing intermittent fasting, can be really helpful, right? Making sure that you're not going too long during the feeding period where you're eating something every 4 hours or so, 3 to 4.
No, I like that because I'm
Yeah.
not a person who can do that 8 hour stretch from lunch to dinner. I start to get grumpy, shaky,
Yeah.
just not feel well in general. And then,
And
of
you
course,
have a good body awareness, though. Most people don't know that. They have those symptoms and they don't realize because they're hungry.
I know they're hungry. Yeah, that's not a good thing. And I like to think of a mini meal because I know a client will come to me and they'll say, "Well, I'm eating 3 meals a day, but I get really hungry here at 4." And I'm like, "Well, have a protein shake with maybe some type of, I don't know, rice cake or something with nut butter on it. Just
Fruit and nut butter,
something." Yeah.
apples and peanut butter,
Right, right.
cheese.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah,
Apples and
cheese.
peanut butter, the best.
So good.
So,
So
um, I also wanted to ask you briefly about PCOS because I was on your website and there was I think a webinar coming up. And how does nutrition, because I find PCOS to be a little bit mysterious, just the way it's been presented in the media. What are your thoughts around this? How can nutrition help with PC? Well, first of all, what is it, and how can nutrition help?
yeah, so PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome. It's a diagnosis of exclusion um, in which women present with a number of different symptoms and physiological abnormalities. It could be very different for each woman, but what's foundational to it is that we're seeing increased androgens, which are the hormones like traditionally considered male, like testosterone, in the presence. Sometimes they have polycystic ovaries, sometimes they don't. So women with PCOS tend to have symptoms that are pretty variable, but generally are associated with having excess androgens. That can be hair loss on the head, hair growth around the chin, sometimes on the chest, missed periods, heavy periods. So something called we call amenorrhea or oligomenorrhea, in which we're experiencing changes on our menstrual cycle. Sometimes those periods can be really painful. They come every 30 days or so, but they're debilitating. And often we see insulin resistance driving this. So we don't really know exactly what the root cause is, but we know that insulin resistance is foundational for many women with PCOS. So really important for us to manage that insulin resistance, which we can do with dietary interventions that we discussed throughout the podcast today, really making sure that we're being mindful of our starchy carbohydrate intake, ensuring that we're having anti-inflammatory foods can also be really helpful for women with PCOS, making sure that we are doing fasted exercise and fasting. Actually, this is a patient population in which fasting probably isn't the best idea. So making sure that we're balancing our blood sugar, managing stress, all of these factors can be really, really helpful. And there's some well-researched nutrition supplements for PCOS as well. So a lot that we can do from a nutrition.
Interesting, because I do get that question. I've got it even from the men that say, "My girlfriend has PCOS. What should she do?" And like I said, it can be a little confusing. And knowing that the fasting maybe isn't the best avenue is, I think, really really helpful. Well, tomorrow this has been absolutely incredible. You just have a wealth of information, and it's solid, and I love that. It's been a great conversation. And as we wrap up, was there anything I didn't touch on you want to share with the listeners? And how can they learn more about your work and perhaps work with you or one of the dietitians in the practice?
Yeah. I just want to encourage everyone. I know that it feels overwhelming to tackle your nutrition. That's why Culina Health exists, so we can make this process a lot easier for you. You can work with a registered dietitian that is covered under your insurance and really get that personalized support that you need. Carol, as you mentioned, we also have a ton of free education and resources on our website,
Yes.
free webinars. So if you don't end up working with one of our RDs, you can also just take a look at our socials and our blog and read up on strong, powerful, evidence-based nutrition so you don't have to be confused with all of the noise out there. So you can just go on our website and book your session and get matched with an RD and see a dietitian within 48 hours.
Oh, that is great. I even love it from the perspective of being a coach because it's a good source of information for me because I was looking at your website going, wow, there's so many topics on here and blogs and these webinars. And so it would be really good for somebody working with different populations to have access to this education. It's great.
Yeah, accessibility is our mission. So we're fighting really hard for everybody to have access to this information and the support. We all need, everybody eats all day, every day.
And do you have a social media where individuals can follow you, or where can we
Yeah,
find you?
you can find us. Our handle is at Culina Health on Instagram. We're also on YouTube and LinkedIn, and our website is culinahealth.com.
I'll make sure all of this is in the show notes. And thank you so much, Tamar, for being on the show today.
Thank you, Carol. It was so wonderful meeting you.
You too. And to our listeners, wherever you are in the world, we wish you every blessing. Bye for now. It'll just take a second to upload.